So hello, I am Mahenoor Yusuf and I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2016 with a PLDA. I'm also co-chairing Harvard in Tech Seattle chapter. Harvard in Tech is the official Harvard University-wide alumni group for technology. We hope to further the development of technology through encouraging innovation, providing resources and networks, and promoting technological activity throughout the Harvard community. Today's webinar is getting recorded and will be shared at the Harvard in Tech Seattle webpage. I'm here with Roger Hackett, my fellow alum, to moderate a panel discussion on COVID-19 vaccines and treatment.
Hello, this is Roger Hackett, and I'm the president of Ryan and Robbie LLC, where we work on children's books for bilinguals and also smart play systems.
So we're so glad to have 6 distinguished panelists joining us today. Dr. Sebastian Sorsaburu, a fellow HBS alum, is the Vice President and Medical Head of Intercontinental region of Amgen. Dr. Sorsaburu is responsible for overseeing all medical activities across the Amgen portfolio in the region, accountable for a medical organization of over 200 people in Canada, Latin America, Turkey, Africa, and the Middle East. He's also a member of the Intercontinental leadership team. During his 20 years of biopharma industry experience, Dr. Sorsaburu worked in country, global, and regional roles in R&D, including clinical operations, drug development, drug safety, and medical affairs across multiple therapeutic areas. Dr. Sorsaburu holds a medical degree from the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina, a business executive certification from Harvard Business School, and a master's degree in molecular oncology with the University of Rey Juan Carlos in Spain. So Dr. Sorsaburu is joining us from Los Angeles.
Mahenoor, pleasure being here. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Next, Dr. Lorence, a Harvard alum, is the Chief Financial Officer of Moderna, helping to raise greater than $4 billion of capital for the company and overseeing the investments to discover and advance a pipeline of 24 development candidates across infectious disease, oncology, rare disease, and autoimmune disease. Dr. Cream graduated from Harvard University, magna cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa with an AB in biochemical science in 1995. He also earned an MBA in healthcare management as a Palmer Scholar from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and an MD from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine in 2000. Dr. Kim is joining us from Cambridge.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Next, we have Dr. Aysu, a Harvard alum, is currently working at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as a strategy officer within the malaria team, working on the foundation's global malaria strategy, as well as assisting with projects on the intersection of malaria and COVID-19 in Africa. Dr. Yusuf received her PhD in genetics from Harvard University in 2014 and pursued postdoctoral studies in cardiac regeneration. Dr. Uygur is joining us from Seattle.
Thank you, Mahenoor. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to the discussion.
Next, Dr. Tarun Gupta is a UK-trained general practitioner, occupational health physician, and clinical leader. He is currently clinical lead for mental health transformation at Birmingham and Solihull Clinic Commissioning Group, the largest CCG in England, and practices as a GP in the NHS, alongside his role as an occupational health physician in the private sector. He graduated with a first-class honors degree in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford University and was awarded the Hicks Webb Medley Prize for the best performance in economics in his year. Dr. Gupta earned his graduate entry medical degree from St. George University of London. He is a GMC registered specialist in general practice and holds postgraduate qualification in occupational medicine and clinical psychiatry. In addition, he completed executive education in leadership and management at Judge Business School, Cambridge University, and more recently at Harvard Business School. Dr. Gupta is joining us from London, UK.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me and look forward to our discussion later.
Next, joining us, Dr. Rhiju Das, a Harvard alum, is an associate professor of biochemistry at Stanford University School of Medicine. His lab focusing on computer modeling and design of RNA molecules, which can code for elaborate biological machines like viruses, ribosomes, and replicases, as well as agile RNA medicines. Dr. Das leads Eterna, an open science platform that crowdsources intractable RNA design problems to 250,000 players of a video game and provides scoring feedback based on actual wet lab experiments. Dr. Das' research has been recognized by the Burroughs Wellcome Career Award at the Interface of Science, the OpenEye American Chemical Society Outstanding Junior Faculty Award, and the Stanford Medicine Endowed Faculty Scholar Award. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Das and Eterna have launched the Open Vaccine Challenge to develop refrigerator-stable COVID-19 mRNA vaccine, which is needed for worldwide immunization. Dr. Das is joining us from Stanford.
Mahenoor and Roger, thank you for the invitation. Really looking forward.
And lastly, Libby Page is the immunization program manager at Public Health, Seattle and King County, where she oversees a population-based immunization promotion program that includes assessment of local immunization coverage level and implementation of tailored evidence-based strategies to increase immunization rates. Libby received a Master's of Public Health degree from the University of Washington and shifted to her current position with the Communicable Disease Epidemiology and Immunization Program. Libby is joining us from Seattle.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you, Mahenoor.
So thank you all for joining us. We are so honored to have you here. Today's panel discussion is about COVID-19 vaccine and treatment. The COVID-19 virus has killed more than 425,000 people and infected over 7.6 million worldwide. This week, the United States has over 2 million COVID-19 cases and the death toll has surpassed 116,000. That's the most confirmed death of any country in the world. It is equivalent to the entire population of mid-sized cities like Albany, New York. It's more American lives than were lost to the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the September 11, 2001 attacks combined. The COVID-19 pandemic places all of humanity against the virus. The damage is health, wealth, and well-being has already been enormous. The entire world is buzzing with uncertainty and questions when the world will be able to go back to the way things were in December before the COVID-19 pandemic. The answer is when we have an almost perfect drug to treat COVID-19, or when almost every person on the planet has been vaccinated against COVID-19. According to Bill Gates, we would need a miracle treatment that was at least 95% effective to stop the outbreak. Most of the drug candidates right now are nowhere near that powerful. They could save a lot of lives, but they aren't enough to get us back to normal, which leaves us with vaccine. Humankind has never had a more urgent task than creating broad immunity for COVID-19. Realistically, if we are going to return to normal, we need to develop a safe, effective vaccine. We need to make billions of doses. We need to get them out to every part of the world, and we need all of these to happen as quickly as possible. The first candidate to start human trials was on an RNA vaccine created by Moderna. So we will start with the burning question to Dr. Kim. When will the COVID-19 vaccine be available? Who are the front runners? And how are the front runners different in each other's goals of the vaccine? Are they all equal? And it is just a question of who has it available first.
Thanks, Mahenoor. It is a there are a number of layers there to unpack. So let me start with a question of timing. Even timing is a simple question, but requires a bit of a nuanced answer. So let me start with just the comment that these are unprecedented times, as you noted. We are seeing the mobilization of the entire pharmaceutical and biotech industry against this problem with immense collaboration with academia and government organizations and NGOs around the world. The best case scenario, I think, is what people are looking for, because I think everybody recognizes that traditional development of a vaccine would take many, many years, right? And so where we are now is we're in a world where we could have a couple of, again, ideal scenarios if everything goes well. One is that has been talked about quite a bit is seeing a so-called full approval of a vaccine around the end of the year, early next year. I'll come back to what that would entail. And then there's an upside case, even beyond that. Remember, everything has to go well for a full approval in that time frame. And then the upside case would even be something that looked like an accelerated approval on the basis of so-called surrogate endpoints that would indicate that a vaccine was reasonably likely to confer a benefit to vaccinated populations. So let me dig further into that. What does that mean to get to a full approval? When one's looking at vaccine development, I think we just have to spend a minute on the different phases of development. And so, Mahenoor, you noted that we started our phase 1 at Moderna back in March. The phase 1 is really looking to vaccinate tens of healthy volunteers to look for safety, importantly, and tolerability of the vaccine. Remember, safety is a critical feature of a vaccine. You said it yourself. You've got to be both safe and effective. And so that has made very good progress, such that then phase 2, for us anyway, has begun, and we're a substantial portion of the way through that. Think here, hundreds of subjects getting vaccinated, again, healthy volunteers. And the point really is to continue to assess that tolerability profile, to understand how effective the vaccines are at inducing these really important neutralizing antibody responses that may be able to confer protection against coronavirus infection. And then ultimately to help inform the choice of a dose. At the end of the day, phase 3 is really going to be the most important stage of all of these vaccine studies. And for phase 3, we just announced yesterday, actually, the design of our phase 3 study. So instead of tens of subjects in phase 1, hundreds of subjects in phase 2, for phase 3, we're talking 30,000 subjects. We're talking about a pretty large study conducted in a very short period of time. And here the purpose, always, as always, is safety first, but then demonstrating vaccine efficacy. And the idea is in a controlled fashion, showing a vaccine arm against a placebo arm. Placebo arm, the idea would be to show that the vaccine is demonstrably preventing the occurrence of symptomatic COVID-19 disease. And that is really the gold standard at the end of the day in vaccine development. And that's what I mean when I talk about potentially getting to a full approval end of the year. A lot of events have to go well. In particular, the most important thing that has to happen in the study is that the vaccinated and the placebo populations actually need to be infected at the end of the day. If you don't have an infection rate amongst that population, then you're not proving anything at the end of the day. So that's the big picture on timing. The second part of the question, and I'll be brief here, it was really about the different technologies and who are the front runners. There are a lot of vaccines in development, and let me also say this, just to be very clear, the world needs multiple vaccines. To your point, if we're going to vaccinate billions of people, this is not a race between companies. This is a race against the clock and against the virus. At the end of the day, multiple vaccines are absolutely needed. There are many companies out there, a number of companies in China, including CanSino, which was the first Chinese vaccine to enter development. A number of names thrown around sort of in the US and Europe are Pfizer alongside us, AstraZeneca, Johnson, Merck, and you're seeing a whole bunch of other companies jumping into the mix. I think the biggest distinction that you're seeing out there is between a few different technologies. We use messenger RNA as our vaccine technology. Moderna was built entirely on mRNA technology. Pfizer's also pursuing this approach. The short version of it is that the messenger RNA encodes for the transient expression of a viral protein to teach the body how to recognize a foreign antigen. Other approaches generally tend to use things like viral vectors. And so the idea here is grow up a lot of virus, having incorporated into that viral genome a tiny bit of the coronavirus genome, so that one can express viral protein and show it to the immune system a different way. And so companies like AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson are pursuing that. And then yet other companies are out there pursuing protein-based approaches, for what it's worth, yet another way of showing the immune system what a virus looks like. All these are potentially attractive technologies. It is very hard to say whether one vaccine is better than another at this point. At the end of the day, the clinical data will speak. And that's what I think everybody will be looking to at the, for evidence of efficacy. I think right now, the entire world is just moving as quickly as it can to push these programs forward at speeds that literally have not been seen before in the vaccine development world. So I'll pause there.
Okay.
Great.
Operation Warp Speed's commitment to deliver a vaccine by January 2021, right? So is it fair to say that we are right on schedule?
So far, things appear to be on schedule.
Okay.
And have been moving with a huge amount of collaboration. I would say that the governmental agencies that are involved are all in close coordination. Industry is in very tight coordination. There are a number of other NGOs that are working closely with companies, and as of now, starting our phase 3 in July, for instance, was somewhere along the line to that best case scenario. Again, many other things have to happen to get there in the next 6 months, but right now things are on track.
I think that was a great overview that Dr. Kim gave. I want to ask the question to Dr. Sorsaburu. So Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, estimated 18 months to develop a coronavirus vaccine. 18 months sounds long, yet usually it takes 5 years. You have to target the virus, create the vaccine, test the vaccine, and then treat. Why can't we have a vaccine sooner? What is the risk versus reward for sooner versus later? And do human trials expedite the schedule?
Well, thank you for the question. And again, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I think that Dr. Kim's answer was very comprehensive and touched directly or indirectly in most of the topics, right? So I will take maybe just a couple of minutes to emphasize a couple of things. But the question of 12 to 18 months, like you said, as why taking so long really makes me want to take a step back first, right? And realize that talking about vaccine development times, when on average they can take between 10 to 15 years, right? Depending on the vaccine, but certainly 10 years there are publications talking about average. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, right, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, speaking of 12 to 18 months, with even potentially use approval, emergency approval utilization by the end of the year, it's like Dr. Kim said, unprecedented, right? This moment of unprecedented efforts, unprecedented collaborations, like Dr. Francis Collins said, and Dr. Fauci too. This is all hands on deck, government, biopharma, multiple institutions. So I would probably say the other way around, right? What makes it possible to aim to expedite the process so dramatically? And clearly, we are talking here about a lot of advances in science over the past years that allow to improvement in sequencing, advances in biotechnology and bioengineering processes, unprecedented collaborations. We were just saying in this case between governments, funds, unprecedented also collaboration and speeding up timelines with regulatory agencies. So all these things are the ones that, if everything goes well, will allow, right, to have something that is efficacious and safe, as it was said before. But I really want to emphasize, particularly to the part of the question, talk about risk reward, about safety, right? Let's not forget that when we're talking about a vaccine, we're talking about exposing healthy population to a therapy, not a therapy, but to biology, to potentially vulnerable population, children. So the threshold for safety here, I mean, safety cannot be short changed, right? It's a major concern. So even if you expedite a lot of the process, you really need to make sure that you can guarantee safety. So this is, the largest, most collaborative vaccine development effort in our lifetime. And also, like Dr. Kim said, right, there are different vaccine strategies. Different companies are approaching different ones. Particularly, this is not a type of condition probably will benefit from one of the most common type of vaccines, which is with weakened viruses, because it, like for the annual flu shot, for example, it's time consuming, more expensive, so it will not benefit. But then, exactly like Dr. Kim said, whether it's proteins, viral vectors, or genetic code like mRNA, are the different vaccines, that different vaccine platforms that different companies are exploring. And I think he also said something very important, right? Which is the only race here is between time and the virus, and we will need multiple vaccines, most likely, because still we need to better understand the correlation between, if you will, providing providing an immune response versus providing efficacy in the real world. So there are multiple hurdles here, but at the same time, right, we're very optimistic, and there are, like he expressed, multiple platforms in development. In the case of mRNA, I really believe it's a very very promising platform. There are no human approved. This is important, right? There are never a human vaccine has been approved, right, with this technology. But companies now like Moderna, or talking about Operation Warp Speed, and Pfizer and others are working here. I think it's very promising. And perhaps, the last thing to say here, just to complement the previous answer, when it comes to, sooner rather than later, let's not forget also that the issue of production and distribution for everybody on the planet. For example, Johnson and Johnson recently stated that they are committed to produce 1 billion doses, assuming everything goes well, by the end of 2021. And I know we'll talk a little bit later, but we're talking about the need of at least 10 times that, right, or more. And then there is the issue of, durability of the vaccine, durability of the response. Even if we have a response, what the durability will be. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it 6 months? So there are multiple elements here around this effort. So very specifically to the question of why can't be faster, I would say that we are, so the question should be the other way around. What does it allow it to be that fast?
Okay, great. I want to go ahead and broaden the question now too, for you, Dr. Sorsaburu, and I also want to add Libby into this conversation. The New York Times says that there are an increased cases of COVID-19, and that rate of increase is the highest that has ever been, because of the deaths and cases in Southeast Asia, South America, and Africa. So once we have enough vaccines, are we all set, or do we have to consider potential mutations and reinfections from other populations? And the question I have for Libby is, who owns the vaccine rollout plan globally versus the US? Who is going to communicate the vaccine's availability to the public? And is there a US rollout plan that we can talk about today? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Sorry, I apologize. No, that's a really good question. I will tackle briefly the first part of it. Basically, the topic of antigenic shift, if you will, right? SARS-CoV-2 has shown so far to be not extremely mutatable, but not extremely stable either. So far, the rate of mutation, it's falling, right, on vulnerable places, particularly with the virus, right? If we develop a vaccine, could be effective. It's not as concerning, like the spike protein, for example, right? The virus has shown substantial sequence diversity, even, as I said, that it has also shown relatively low mutation rate. Actually, at Amgen, as part of our wholly owned subsidiary, Decode, an Icelandic genetic company that is part of Amgen, we have done it was in the New England Journal of Medicine in April, was a publication looking at the variety of strains of the virus that actually were observed and multiple sequence variants or mutations that were also identified. So clearly, we expect, otherwise it wouldn't be this type of virus, but definitely will be some type of mutation. Hopefully what we are seeing so far in the scientific literature, is that it's not extremely mutatable. In fact, I mean, if I'm not wrong, what I've read, the most recent readings, it was actually even less than the common influenza virus. So
that's encouraging then, right?
Yeah, and actually, I mean, this is again, but at the same time, it definitely is encouraging. Particularly, one of the reasons why it's encouraging, even if the virus will mutate, even if we will have to probably work with different strains over time, but certainly it's encouraging, particularly to this question that we're talking about speed, because if we're having a speed for development, right, of the first, because we're in a pandemic situation, it seems, I was recently reading at JAMA, Dr. Francis Collins talking about this topic, and he was saying that there's no reason to believe that the efforts of today will not work tomorrow, meaning during this 12, 18 months period, right, in terms of the mutation rate. But of course, again, still we need to understand what, I mean, assuming we have efficacy, what that effect, for how long that efficacy will be confirmed. Because again, it's not just about the duration, if it's 1 year or 2 years, longer or shorter, but also when it comes about vaccine development and the doses that we need, if we need to have, double, triple immunization for someone to be protected, that also has manufacturing right implications.
Okay, can we add Libby into this conversation for the second part then?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of how the vaccine might be rolled out, in the US, the FDA will review the clinical data that's generated by all of these pharmaceutical companies and then make a decision about which vaccine should be licensed. And then the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices will be responsible for making recommendations for which population should be vaccinated with specific vaccines. And I think a likely scenario is that, if the vaccine is in short supply initially, or if there's an emergency use authorization, then rather than broad distribution across the population, it's likely that there will be selective populations prioritized for vaccination. And in that case, the FDA and the CDC would work together to make decisions about which groups to prioritize to receive the vaccine. And some examples could be healthcare workers, first-line workers, people in essential jobs, and of course, individuals who are at highest risk for complications of COVID. I'm not as familiar, being, most of my career has been at the local level domestically. I'm not as familiar with how vaccine rollout will look internationally, but I do think it would involve, likely involve transaction between pharmaceutical companies and national governments or groups of governments working together to purchase vaccine. And then I would imagine that ministries of health would make decisions about how they'll dispense the vaccine in their own countries, and look to international organizations such as WHO to offer guidance on how the vaccine would be prioritized.
Okay, I wonder if Dr. Gupta or Dr. Kim, you guys want to add anything to the global, how you see working either with other companies or working with other governments?
I think we need to unmute Dr. Kim as well.
I think that it will be very challenging. I think that the distribution of vaccine is going to be a significant matter of cooperation and/or competition amongst countries and regions, particularly in the early days. Production of vaccine is very much rate limiting. reference, Dr. Sorsaburu made reference to the ambitions to make things like 1 billion doses of vaccine per year. But the problem, of course, is you never start at steady state, you ramp up. And so when we're talking about potential approval of a vaccine and everything that needs to go into scaling up the capacity to actually deliver vaccine, we're going to be stretching supply chains with respect to raw materials and the inputs that go into these things. We're going to be stretching the availability of doses and then the distribution capabilities itself. And so I don't think there's a very easy answer to this question of what happens, especially early. I mean, you can fast forward 18 months and say, okay, let's say we have, 3 different vaccines on the market and 1 billion doses of each. Okay, even that is a challenge. But what happens at the end of this year if I'm going to pick a number, if there are 100 million doses of vaccine available worldwide? Who gets those? And I would not purport to have an easy answer from the perspective of where, a company like Moderna sits.
Dr. Gupta, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I think there is a real risk that we end up doing this based on people's ability to pay and a risk of inequality. Having said that, Europe has been the second epicenter, if you like, after the US, with a greater number of fatalities than many other countries. Perhaps that's due to reporting and other variables. And I'll touch on that in my own question later. But I'd like to think that we in Europe, partly because of underlying reasons, the aging population and multi-morbidity, probably would figure highly. And I suppose we do have the EU. I mean, we're in the EU. Well, we've left the EU technically, but we are still in it till the end of the year to some extent of the UK. So we might be able to get some kind of coordinated response across the EU plus UK for the hard-hit countries, Italy, Spain, the UK, and so on, where I think we've seen that infection rates are very high and fatality rates are high too. So I think there's something there for once where the kind of need matches the ability to pay, which otherwise could be another more controversial issue with the whole who gets it first.
Since we're talking about who might get it first, I wonder if Dr. Uygur, you could speak a little bit to how that might happen.
Sure. I mean, that is a good question. We can first review maybe about who gets it first. We should really be most worried about underserved communities in the world who will be expected to be hit hardest by COVID-19. And that's not necessarily only because of COVID-19, but the real danger being if healthcare systems are saturated or overwhelmed because of the COVID-19 peak, that will really limit an already limited access to healthcare in the poorest communities in the world, or the minority communities or refugee communities that are already not getting a very robust healthcare or treatment. There are already diseases in the world that we think are eliminated in the world, like in the developed world, like malaria or measles, that are still the leading cause of death in really the poorest countries in the world. And we're already trying to prepare some of the African countries for how to mitigate the risks of just an increased mortality because of these other diseases. So given this underlying set of conditions that should make us think even more about underserved communities, I think the world leaders or really just countries will need to coordinate and unite on prioritizing different populations. It could be prioritizing based on vulnerable populations, or if the objective is to prevent an economic disruption, you could prioritize essential workers. But I think in the end, it's going to be a mix of maybe depending on how much dose we have when, maybe healthcare workers who are currently they have the highest risk and are the most vulnerable, followed by maybe populations that are at greater risks, like 65 plus populations, and then potentially essential workers. But it will have to be a collaboration. We can't depend on the market. We can't do it on a first come, first basis, it just cannot be a repetition of what happened with the ventilators and the masks, where the wealthiest countries and communities got their hands on the first stock. So it's really important for countries and global leaders to collaborate on this.
More on logistics and distribution. This question is for Dr. Sorsaburu. IFPMA, International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations Director Thomas Queen pointed out that the world will need estimated 15 million doses to stop the virus, posing massive logistical challenges. So how can we ensure such mass production and have a robust global distribution process in place to achieve that? And the follow-up question for Libby would be, what kind of role public and private partnership is playing in vaccine production and distribution?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, these are good questions, because it feels more like we're having a continuum of a dialogue, right? In all these topics. So clearly, like Dr. Kim also was saying, it's difficult to have the answer to how exactly is it going to be achieved. And yes, I was reading that data from the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Association, estimating that realistically, for everybody to get a vaccine, we might need around 12 to 15 billion doses. And just to put in perspective, today, the five, six largest vaccine manufacturers produce in total about half of that volume annually, right? Like we said before, the only way that this can be pulled off is because this is not business as usual for the biopharmaceutical sector in particular, but certainly governments and many others, non-profit organizations, regulatory agencies, all of them working together. If we have an effective and safe vaccine, the biggest challenge clearly will be production and distribution. The ability to scale up manufacturing is critical, and one of the things that actually is happening right now, or definitely is gonna be happening by the companies. It's not the case of Amgen, where I work. We are clearly focused in the COVID-19 fight, but through three different elements, as I mentioned before, through genetics epidemiology, through our DICO subsidiary, repurposing of drugs, potentially to fight COVID-19, and a particularly promising new type of therapeutic, which is monoclonal antibodies. That being said, I made that comment because I'm not working specifically in the vaccine space, but one of the things that is critical, and all of the companies that are working on the vaccine space know it has to happen, is to really start scaling up at risk before knowing if a vaccine program is going to work or not, in order to get to that 12 or 18 or whatever time is that it's the soonest. They cannot wait for that efficacy, for that approval to start working, to start scaling up manufacturing. So that will be an important component. And then, like Dr. Kim was saying, we don't know what will happen. We may have, even with all those efforts and one company, maybe 300,000 doses. So what do we do with that? So put in perspective the challenges, like I said, on the positive side, clearly this is all hands on deck, and scaling up manufacturing at risk is part of the strategy. There is no doubt. And the other element is to take into consideration, right, that in order to help produce billions of doses, right, there are other elements and other challenges that need to be sorted out, including, even that it may sound kind of silly, but the production of billions of glass vials, and how to deal with that, logistics for distribution, and storage and shipment requirement, depending on what type of vaccine. There may be different storage requirements, and for distribution, for logistics, some are easier than others. So it is challenging, and I think that it's important, at least for the broader audience, to understand that, even if we have a very successful program soon, the potential for that to reach everyone, it's practically impossible, right? And then, as I was saying, over the next, even all being speed up, but over the next 1, 2, 3 years, well, hopefully we'll get to a steady state where we can supply all that is needed. But it's a significant effort at multiple levels.
Okay, Paige?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Sorsaburu says. I mean, it's something that we're thinking about a lot about at the local and state health department level, recognizing that our health systems are very likely to be, overextended and not capable of carrying this burden alone. So I just echo the sentiment that it will be all hands on deck when it comes to vaccine distribution, maintaining cold chain, and also thinking about novel technologies. As you mentioned, anticipation of the shortage of glass vials, where I know that PATH and other organizations are looking at ways, for example, 200 or 400 dose pouches. So this is, I think that's a really exciting area, and a lot of opportunity exists in that area to maximize the distribution of vaccine. But I also think it introduces complications when you're talking about a healthcare system that's already overextended, and the thinking too about the additional layer of training required for health departments and also for nurses and physicians for how to administer vaccine and using equipment that they may be unfamiliar with. So just out of that additional layer of complexity is something that we're thinking a lot about now. I think another area that we haven't touched on yet, maybe it will be in a future question, is around just increasing vaccine confidence and preparing the population for accepting this vaccine. There have been some recent surveys that have come out that suggest that just 30% of people would be likely to receive the vaccine as soon as it becomes available. So that's very concerning for us.
So Dr. Kim, would you like to add?
I'm not sure I have a lot to add on the manufacturing side. As I mentioned, we're undertaking investment at risk. Other companies are doing the same thing. Everything is working in parallel in this unprecedented time. So not only are the clinical development steps all overlapping, so is the manufacturing. And so it's important the capital is flowing to be able to do that. So I'd underscore the same points made earlier.
Sorry for interrupting. No, I just wanted to simply underscore what Libby was saying, that perhaps sometimes we don't think about it. Vaccine acceptance. Mm-hmm. That is so important from a public health perspective. And again, just wanted to emphasize, because sometimes we forget that unfortunately we're still living in an era in which the anti-vaccine movement, or some, without qualifying it, right? But people that believe that has actually going up rather than going down. So if a certain potential population don't receive the vaccine, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a critical point. So Dr. Das, your project Open Vaccine Crowd sources COVID-19 RNA vaccine. Can you explain what your project is, how it will lead to a RNA vaccine, and what an RNA vaccine does?
Open Vaccine Project is trying to solve a problem that has already arisen in our discussion. We know that to stop the COVID pandemic, we have to do two things. We need to create the vaccine, get it working, and we have to get that into billions of people. And until we do that, more people will die, and the inequalities that are being exacerbated right now by the pandemic will continue and probably get worse. But there's this kind of irony that the fastest vaccines that may come into play, RNA vaccines, are such a new technology that they're going to be the ones that are least likely to be made available to billions of people. And in fact, there's an intrinsic biochemical issue with RNA being the basis of the vaccine. So unlike flu vaccines, which are put into saline solutions and sent out in pre-filled syringes, and which can go out through an existing scalable refrigerated supply chain, RNA molecules are intrinsically unstable. And so the minute they're put into saline solutions and into syringes, they start to lose their potency on the timescale of days, and we really need them to be stable on the timescale of months. Now, there's a hint from RNA scientific literature that if you can redesign these RNA vaccines to form little stable packages, they could have the shelf stability or refrigerator stability that's needed, but sustain and maybe even amplify their potency as vaccines. And so that's the problem that my lab and I have been working on. And I'd say the biggest accelerations and innovations have come from an unusual source, a crowdsourcing platform called Eterna. This is a platform that crowdsources intractable problems in RNA design to 250,000 people on the internet through a game-like interface. And this community votes on solutions. My lab at Stanford and our colleagues actually synthesize these potential mRNA vaccines and characterize them in vitro for their stability and for their ability to be expressed into proteins in human cells. And through this virtuous cycle of gameplay and experimental feedback, we're seeing unusually rapid innovations in our ability to computationally and then experimentally stabilize these vaccine candidates. Our hope is over the next 2 or 3 months to put out about 4 papers describing these innovations, and we are patenting several of them to make sure that they're licensable to any RNA vaccine effort. Maybe one notable invention that was just put out as a scientific preprint 2 weeks ago describes the most accurate folding engine for modeling RNA structure. It's the best package. It's the best algorithm for predicting RNA data that are coming out of the Eterna platform, but also for data that are coming out of Moderna and other industry and academic labs working on RNA vaccine.
The next question I have here is for Dr. Gupta. The number of COVID-19 deaths in the UK is significantly greater than Germany. How does the density and distribution of the virus in the UK change how we test and treat COVID-19 once vaccines are available? And can you also elaborate on currently available treatment options and their effectiveness?
Look, I think there's a lot of controversy here, but I want to be honest and say that there is clearly a difference between Germany and the UK in terms of what's unfolded. I put it down to 3 factors: kind of political, economical, economics, and then kind of statistics. We we're late to the game of lockdown. We were about 8 days behind Germany. And we're comparing Germany and the UK because we're kind of same populations in a way, similar sized countries. But they locked down on the 15th. We locked down on the 23rd or so. We had a kind of slightly delayed response. We wanted to be a bit different. There was political reasons for that. I think we've been upfront about it. The UK government's chief medical advisor, Chris Whitty, said Germany got ahead in terms of its ability to kind of do testing. So there's an economic thing there as well. They've got 100+ labs, very quick to do the kind of test, treat, isolate, much greater capacity. They were doing 500,000 tests per week by the beginning of April, and the UK was doing 7,000. If you look at the numbers as of today, there are about 185,000 cases in Germany with only 9,000 deaths. Actually, it's 8,800. In the UK, we had more cases, 280,000 cases so far today, and unfortunately 41,000 deaths. So it's dramatic, and you can't necessarily put it down to comparing like for like, although we'll touch on that. So I think even our health secretary did say that we didn't have Public Health England didn't have the infrastructure to get the testing and tracing and isolating rolled out at the same way, and so we couldn't track where it was going and kind of stop the spread. And also, like I said, we were a bit slow with the lockdown. So just turning to the last bit, and this is where as a frontline GP, it gets a bit murky as to what's a COVID-19 death. When you're filling out a death certificate, is it listed as the main cause, or is it one of the 2 secondary causes or 3 secondary causes on there? I think both Germany and the UK agreed that you need to test positive for it to be kind of on there. But the question then goes into was it the primary cause of death, or is it another confounding factor in somebody who was already unwell and happened to test positive for it, either because of their susceptibility to it and they ended up in hospital, or whether they were in a care home where we've had a big problem in care homes, and I think that's a whole separate issue, but and a very politically charged one about how we managed people going from hospital to care homes, and what we did to kind of prevent the spread in our care home population, which is kind of another issue. So that's the first part of your question. The density distribution, I mean, what we've done is try to classify people clinically into clinically vulnerable and then extremely clinically vulnerable. And, Dr. Aysu talked about it before, over 70s, people on immunosuppressants, cancer, spleen, patients. We've tried to, pick out those groups. We've also noted that there's a higher incidence in the minority BAME population. And then beyond that, we've also realized that certain populations like healthcare workers and key workers are higher risk. So I think, as and when vaccines become available, we'll need to look at prioritizing those groups ideally. And I think most of the population understands that they are the ones that are deemed clinically extremely vulnerable. I mean, at the moment, we've taken the view of what they call shielding. So the guidelines that came out for this group were that you shouldn't really leave the house at all for 12 weeks from that point in March until the end of June. No contact with anyone outside and shielding. And if you were working, the government introduced a furlough scheme where you could get paid your wages 80% of from the government and 20% from your employer till that date, which has actually now been extended till the end of August, including for that population. So I'm talking about the kind of the clinically extremely vulnerable population. So I think that will be our approach when we do have a vaccine that's kind of notwithstanding all the other issues we've talked about in terms of distribution and administration, but if we do have something, that would be the way to rank. Elaborating on currently available treatment options and their effectiveness. Look, I mean, I think from a frontline clinician perspective, at the moment, the number one treatment is kind of isolation and kind of prevention in the first place. Then we talk about what you do with mild to moderate symptoms, and we've got the kind of self-isolation periods. And then you're into that group with severe symptoms of people who are hospitalized. And that's where we're seeing a raft of new things being trialed out. There's a catalyst trial going on for one of the human monoclonal antibodies. Sebastian was talking about it earlier. Several of these drugs are, targeting what we call the cytokine storm. So what we're seeing with hospitalized patients is that the normal immune response is unfortunately going into overdrive. And it's actually the bigger problem than the virus is your own body's response to COVID-19, as everybody has kind of already mentioned. These drugs are newer anti-inflammatories. They kind of have different ways of working on different proteins that modulate the inflammatory response, used for other autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, for instance. And we're trying to use these in either people who are starting to get really sick before they get onto the ventilators in ITU, or kind of when they're already on there to see if we can slow this process down, which is actually the bigger thing. And I just want to talk on something slightly different. From a GP perspective, is that we're having a lot of unintended consequences of our focus purely on COVID. We're seeing a dramatic increase or fall in the number of people that have been referred for suspected cancer, people coming in for chronic care management. The number of heart attacks and strokes presenting in A&E in the UK in April this year across the country is half compared to April last year. Now that does not make any sense. So that means that people are not seeking help for even emergency conditions, let alone the kind of wider public health impact of people not having chronic health checks. And I think the unintended consequences of this focus will actually be considerable and will disproportionately affect kind of people in the lower socioeconomic groups. And I think from a GP perspective, that's something that we're kind of really grappling with, and a commissioner perspective locally, especially with my interest in mental health. We're kind of seeing that, you know, we kind of get into this bubble around just looking at physical health and COVID, but actually there's a whole other picture starting to build up of the kind of psychosocial impacts of that.
I want to expand on this question a little bit more with Dr. Uygur, and maybe add some other people into the conversation here, especially around innovation. You know, one of the things that happens in innovation is that you can make parallel investments, and that's exactly what it feels like we're doing with the Gates Foundation, which has funded 7 front-running vaccine candidates for manufacturing to produce a COVID-19 vaccine at scale. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how this will impact the timeline and availability of vaccines once a vaccine is approved. And I'm hoping the group can also expound a little bit upon when are some of these innovations that we're talking about good innovations versus we have to really be careful about those innovations that we're trying to approach.
Sure. So I'll start, but I do have a strict cutoff at 3 p.m. So I'll open up, and then I hope the group can continue discussing. So Gates Foundation is supporting 7 front-running vaccine candidates. Vaccine manufacturing is a very expensive process. And this commitment to 7 front-running vaccines, you know, the commitment to manufacturing is at a magnitude that's over $1 billion. So typically, because vaccine manufacturing is very expensive, the manufacturing is a sequential step. After you prove the success, safety, efficacy of a vaccine, after the clinical trials, you start planning. And from planning to the manufacturing of the first batch, it's usually around 4 or 5 years maybe. But since we are in unusual times, there's going to be unusual measures that will come in. And by spending more money, we could run the necessary steps, at least some of them in parallel, such as not waiting to see efficacy or safety before actually investing on all the 7 candidates. And then we do have to remember that the manufacturing process that takes 45 years from planning to the first batch isn't just putting up a building. It involves the assets, either building a new plant or repurposing an existing plant. But there's also going to be procurement of really customized special equipment that's unique to how that particular vaccine is manufactured. And then all the regulatory processes that have to ensure to the public that what's going to be produced is going to be safe, it's going to be high efficacy, and then also the training of the personnel. So this is, you know, it involves many different dimensions at the same time, and hopefully running some of them in parallel would make sure that we don't have to wait 4 or 5 years after a vaccine is shown, you know, proven scientifically to work. Hopefully it can actually be ready to produce as first batch, you know, shortly after we know we have a vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Uygur. So we will actually move on to the audience question. A lot of the questions had already been addressed. One of the questions is that can you speak to the COVID-19 vaccine pricing structure? Dr. Kim, would you like to address that?
Sure. I think it's important to understand that there's been a huge focus to date on discovering the vaccine, developing the vaccine, and making the vaccine. I think the work has to be done on sort of the appropriate way to price it, but I do think that the principles at play here have everything to do with ensuring that access is possible to people that need it. And I think that's sort of where our task sits. We have not gone so far as to discuss price at this point, mainly because, again, our efforts have been focused on speed. But again, I come back to ensuring that you know, once the distribution plans are set up, once we grapple with this notion of being supply constrained, I think pricing is intended again to ensure that people who need it can get it.
Excellent. Thank you. There are a lot of questions from our audience. Unfortunately, we are not able to address them due to the time limitation. However, later we will upload the recorded webinar resources info at the Harvard InTech website. We are ready to wrap up now. On behalf of Harvard InTech Seattle, Roger and I thank you for your time. Today. Our panelists, Dr. Sorsaburu, Dr. Uygur, Dr. Kim, Dr. Gupta, Dr. Das, and Libby, thank you. It was very informative and we have learned a lot. To the participants, thank you for joining us today. It is remarkable how significantly all of our lives have changed over the past months. We hope you and your loved ones are staying safe and healthy during COVID-19. We are grateful for the connection and strength of the Harvard alumni community. Thanks to your generosity and support. Hope this webinar will bring in some thought-provoking discussion. If you are interested in learning more, please join us at Harvard InTech Seattle. And thank you. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.